You know that feeling, right? When you're completely lost in a game, exploring these incredible worlds that feel so real, so alive. It's just magic. It feels like it's all just made of light and code, existing only on our screens and in our heads.
But what if that's not the whole story? As virtual as these worlds feel, they are absolutely tied to our physical planet in ways we almost never think about. So that's the big question, isn't it? What is the real cost of our digital escapes?
So every single game, and I mean every game, from the tiniest indie passion project to the biggest AAA blockbuster, is connected to this massive, hidden physical world. We're talking about the power plants generating electricity, the raw materials literally dug out of the ground, the global server farms, the whole shebang. Today, we're going to pull back that curtain.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious cost. Power. Just plain old electricity. It's what lights up our screens, for sure, but it's also the immense amount of energy that goes into the worldwide effort of just creating these games in the first place.
So, to make this real, let's look at a piece of hardware we all know, the PlayStation 4. Researchers actually measured its power draw during gameplay, and the number they got? 137 watts. To put that in perspective, that's like leaving a couple of bright, old-school, incandescent light bulbs on for every single second you're playing.
Now let's zoom out from just playing the game to actually making it. At a huge studio like Ubisoft, the annual carbon emissions average out to about 3.8 tons of CO2 per employee. Now multiply that by the tens of thousands of people in this industry, and you start to get a picture of the enormous energy footprint needed just to bring these games to life.
All right, so what about the big debate? Digital download or physical disc? Which one is greener? It's a question a lot of us ask, but the answer is kind of surprising. Yeah, both have an impact. Server farms for downloads, manufacturing and shipping for discs. But here's the kicker. The amount of electricity you use just to play the game over its lifetime is so huge that it completely dwarfs how you bought it. The real takeaway here is that how we play matters so much more than how we buy.
Okay, so we've talked about the invisible cost of energy. Now let's talk about that very real, very physical thing sitting in your living room, the console itself. It's not just a magic box, you know. It's a collection of elements that were mined from the earth, and each one has its own story and its own environmental price.
And that brings us to this really stark concept from the research called the periodic table of torture. It's a jarring name for sure, but it's meant to describe the deep environmental damage and social harms that are tied to the raw elements inside our hardware, like, say, the main processor of a PlayStation 4. This isn't just about carbon anymore, this is about the physical scars left on the Earth itself. Let's dive in with element number 28, nickel. It's a crucial component inside that processor. The whole thing just wouldn't work without it. But where does it come from? And, more importantly, at what cost? The energy required is, well, it's just staggering. Check this out. The energy it takes to produce just 1 single kilogram of refined nickel, that's about 2.2 pounds, is the same amount of energy it would take to drive a Tesla for 400 kilometers, or about 250 miles. That is a wild amount of power packed into a tiny bit of metal. And the harm here goes way beyond just energy use. Extracting nickel often involves a process called high-pressure acid leaching, and the fallout can be devastating and long-lasting. For example, some poorly regulated Soviet-era mining operations up on Russia's Kola Peninsula are still major sources of mercury contamination that is polluting the Arctic to this day. Okay, next up, element 13, aluminum. You know, we think of it as a pretty common everyday metal, and it is. In a console, it's used in things like the heatsink that keeps the whole system from overheating. But even this familiar metal comes with a really heavy environmental price tag.
This quote right here points to a huge, escalating problem for all kinds of mining. Think about it. As we use up all the easy-to-get, high-quality ores, we have to work way, way harder to get the same amount of metal from the lower-grade stuff that's left. That means it takes dramatically more energy and creates even more pollution. And that environmental cost is just going to keep going up.
Yeah, the journey from raw bauxite ore in the ground to the finished aluminum in your console is a pretty dirty one. It means large-scale mining, a refinement process that needs temperatures around 950 degrees Celsius, and it releases not just CO2, but also these things called PFCs, greenhouse gases that can be thousands of times more powerful at trapping heat than carbon dioxide.
So, with all of this in mind, what does it even mean for a game to be green or ecological? It's easy to just think of games with pretty nature themes, but the analysis we're looking at today argues we need to think much, much deeper than that.
And this right here is the heart of the whole thing. A truly ecological game isn't defined by what's on the screen. It's defined by its real-world material footprint. It's a game that is actually aware of the energy it uses, the materials it's made from, and its place in this giant global supply chain. Its real value is measured not in its graphics, but in its honesty about its own material cost.
To really ground this idea, the source material turns to an indigenous perspectives, quoting the anthropologist Deborah Bird Rose. This is such a powerful statement because it frames taking care of the environment not as some abstract ideal, but as a direct act of self-preservation. It's this profound lesson in interdependence, that we aren't separate from our environment, we are completely and totally a part of it.
Okay, acknowledging the problem is the first step. But really, the most important part is what we do next. This isn't about giving up the games we love, not at all. It's about making them better and making the industry that creates them more responsible. So what can actually be done? Well, for us as players, there are things we can do personally and as a group. We can switch our homes to renewable energy suppliers and actually use those power-saving modes on our consoles. We can choose to repair our stuff instead of just buying new all the time. And maybe most importantly, we can use our collective voice, ask companies about their climate policies, join advocacy groups, because that kind of organized pressure is what really creates change.
And for the industry itself, the changes need to be on a much bigger, more fundamental level. Developers can organize and unionize to get the power they need to push for change from the inside. Companies have to audit their supply chains and demand sustainable materials. And, this is a huge one, they can break the cycle of disposable hardware by designing consoles that are built to last and are actually easy for us to repair. That would be a game changer.
The research wraps up by bringing in this famous short story by Ursula K. Le Guin about a perfect, happy city called Omelas. But its joy depends on the secret, endless suffering of one child. And when some people find out this horrible truth, they just walk away. For us, with an industry as massive and woven into our culture as gaming, just walking away isn't really an option. So that leaves us with a much harder, but also, I think, a much more hopeful question. Instead of walking away from Omelas, can we stay and fix it? Can we imagine and then actually start to build a games industry that's restorative and sustainable? A future where the magic we see on the screen doesn't come at the expense of the one planet we all share.